Whitepaper on accounting for climate change.
Recently, I was a speaker in WTE World Talent Economy Forum, hosted by its president, Sharif. On 15th of September 2021, on CO2 emission, and on the 22nd, negative CO2 emission, I share with you the extract of the burning problem discussed during the two sessions and my take on it. Accounting for climate change. The two sessions I participated gave me an insight into the climate change as a global disaster mismanagement of epic proportion. This is my podcast episode number 5, Accounting for Climate Change. In episode number 4, Accounting for Dreams, I brought out Klaus Schwab's declaration of I 4.0, the fourth industrial revolution, with a specific remarks on the first, the second, and the third industrial revolution. The first industrial revolution enabled colonization more secure and profitable. Territories gained by any means, ending up with the World War I. The second used electric power to create mass production, scientific invention, electric gas chambers, mass destruction, ending up with the World War II, bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The third used electronics and information technology to automate production as well as cheat software, tampering with the voting systems, toppling the governments, installing leaders of their choice, assisting biological warfare, hiding diesel emission, and ending up with a COVID-19 disaster. Now, it is the climate change. All that we constructed in the first 3 industrial revolutions now need to be deconstructed, rather decarbonized. Making Texas, Nigeria, or Middle East poor is not an option. We are at the cusp of the fourth industrial revolution and finding an answer how to deconstruct valueless and construct values. The I 4.0, the fourth industrial revolution, spins around the two. 1, advanced digital technology, and 2, the societal changes. Bring the second factor upfront and work towards societal partnership for the industry to escape from Plato's cave. Damien Carrington, environmental editor, writing in The Guardian, reports, fossil fuel industry gets subsidized of 11 million a minute IMF fines. Trillions of dollars a year are adding fuel to the fire of the climate crisis, experts say. So said Damien. This is all due to the hierarchical one-man call center. A handful of people design but do not want to own up the chaos they have left behind. Attrition of values necessitates bring abstraction into reality. Acknowledge value where value is due and deconstruct what is valueless. A handful will not do, but every person within an organization must work on the dictum of reconstructing values. Scope 3 is extensive to the inclusion of the supply chain. A truck driver associated with a company working in Timbuktu must realize so should a pilot, so should a shipping crew. Should the object-oriented return on investment? It had not worked. It only gave the managers from avoiding accountability. Change the denominator. Go for a return on intangible, the energy source that moves the planet. I shall present you a synopsis of climate change discussion organized by WTE Forum, followed by my recommendation as to how to manage the Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 of CO2 emission and the climate change. Pleased to attach a small clip from the discussion where Sharif points out my contribution during the discussion, inviting me to the editorial board of WTE Forum.
Does not directly involve any of the companies like Microsoft being invested upon by this particular ESG funds. So the danger is very heavy. And we are talking about $40.5 trillion worth of ESG data in terms of investment and identified and the products that they are supposed to do without realizing that we are doing a minuscule of one process block out of 158, and that is how we are making a judgment for investment. So this has to change. This has to be reduced. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Raja. Actually, World Talent Economy Forum, we always encourage different talented. Already many young people, they join in World Talent Economy Forum as our fellow, like Mr. Adam, also fellow for World Talent Economy Forum. Beside that, we have our board of advisors and our scientific committee, like Mr. Paul, Mr. Donalds, Mr. Dan is in our scientific committees as our board of advisor. But we want people like Mr. Raja. He's 79 years old, and how he actually contributing and sending me the write-up and analysis about our session. We are really impressed. We already finished around 375 episode. If you join in our editorial panel, we have our strong editorial panel. You can analyze different sessions and you can give us guideline. And that is the example for our youth communities. Age is not a matter. Age is just a number. If you are motivated enough, if you are knowledgeable, and if you want to contribute, age never be a matter. So we are talent economy. We are focusing on talents. Perhaps I really grateful to you, Mr. Raja, how you try to analyze your views. Even I'm impressed with your write-up. So that's why I want to invite you in our board. And your contributions will be very helpful for our youth community, very helpful for our developing nations. I know you are from India, but we need more leaders, more talented people like you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Now
sir.
I request,
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. James Eat. Thank you, Mr. Marshall, for joining today's session. Yes,
Finally.
Mr. James Eat.
Technology issues.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sharif. What a wonderful discussion, and I really appreciate all the previous contributors. And I don't want to single anyone out, but Sri Raja was talking about something that's near and dear to my heart, and that's metrics. How do we get to the actual facts rather than the opinions? And I believe that this requires a post-capitalist society, because the capitalist society.
Life outside city. Professor James Ehrlich.
Let me start with Professor James Ehrlich, who has brought the future to the present. End goal of what we desire, the societal change. Life outside the city that we contemplate to achieve by I 4.0, the fourth industrial revolution.
Invited to Malaysia 3 times since 2014 to discuss this topic of life outside of cities and building especially strong, hyper-local, regenerative and resilient neighborhoods, a neighborhood infrastructure that's focused primarily on critical life support systems. So clean water, clean energy, high-yield organic food production, waste-to-resource management, and this concept really that you don't need to live in the city to be productive and to have self-worth, and also to be able to take care of yourself and your family. So our goal has been, very much aligned with that of the Malaysian government now for many years, which is looking at the kampung. And many people in Malaysia, of course, are maybe just half a generation or less away from their kampung, right? Their village.
Yes.
Be able to create this circumstance where people can return home in a way, but in in a fashion that allows them to live in these very beautiful turnkey communities that uplifts the social and affordable housing and creates these places where people can flourish.
Case to reduce CO2, develop peri-urban and rural communities.
I would like to present you with a very interesting observation as well as a suggestion as how CO2 emission could be normalized, I would say. It's very difficult to find a word. Thing is, on 3 areas. Normally what we do is that we calculate the total CO2 emission by the country, each country. Secondly, we also do per capita. So with the result, the number 1 in that area where, for example, China is number 1 in terms of total. But it's nowhere to be seen when you calculate per capita. So is the case with India. So here I am introducing how to look at the stats, analytics in terms of per square kilometer of each country and what this study provides you in terms of shifting the balance from urban to peri-urban to villages in terms of not only decarbonization, possibly oxidization. A lot of things which Professor James had been telling about would be of a great value in my opinion. As I said, it is a end goal, that is a shift to the rural areas and make it self-sufficient, and we are in a position to at the same time take the steps in terms of reducing the carbon emission actually. This is my presentation. Many an industry was shifted from urban to rural areas, with many a small city becoming an industry hub, fully charged and fully carbonized. Now, developing peri-urban villages would help start the decarbonization process. This is number 1 and 2. Number 3, where could it be done? I am providing you with a table 1 and table 2 that make an interesting study. The top 10 ranked by CO2 emission total get changed when ranked by area. South Korea, Japan, Germany top the list. The same 10 of category 1 when ranked by population per capita, Saudi Arabia tops the list. China and India escape from top 10 charts. The US, South Korea, Japan and Germany remain in the top 10 by per capita. Now, take the top 10 by per capita and redo by area. Then South Korea, Japan, Germany and the US remain in top 5. Now, let us take another phase where our original intention to shift from the urban area, the industries to small cities and make them completely charged with carbon emission. That purpose was not solved. Let us find it out. The second industrial revolution perpetrated mass production leading to carbonization of cities. The third digital revolution enabled shifting the industrial development hubs to smaller cities, adding CO2 to the smaller cities. At the same time, although cities were relieved of industrial development, massive building construction took place that had multiplied the CO2 factor all over. What Hitler did not learn from Napoleon is repeated by China from the US. I will give you an example. You may remember John Connally, the then Texas governor, sitting in the front seat of the motorcade when JFK was, John F. Kennedy was shot, became the Secretary of Treasury under Nixon. Later, he bet his money on office buildings, condominium projects that led to his filing for bankruptcy. He oversaw his entire property, his ranch and every piece, including the belt with the inscription, the Secretary of Treasury of the United States, were all auctioned off. He was a man of guts and great character. One feels very sorry when you see the BBC, they sing about credit card actually, where they showed John Kennedy, that part. Now, we witness Evergrande crisis in China of real estate boom busted. It is said 90 million people, as on today, can easily occupy the ghost cities that remain vacant. It's quite amazing. How amazing it is, the repetition of the same mistake. We don't learn. That's a problem. Let's go to the fifth point. The mass production and building construction are the cause of massive CO2 emissions that have grown exponentially over the years. Number one, peri-urban areas can be a great contributor to decarbonization, but South Korea, Japan, and Germany would find it very difficult for want of space. There is no maneuverability for these small countries with lesser area, good population, and where will they maneuver from? So these three countries have to be very careful about it. With work from home concept can be taken to logical expansion of peri-urban area development, and simultaneously the negative or zero emission process of change from urban and industrialized cities. Zero emission is doable, must bring the indigenous wisdom to the table, as Professor James Eldridge says, the main constant for the societal changes, the very essence of I 4.0, the fourth industrial revolution. Let us have a good look at it, how to go about it.
Sustainable Living Planning, Sheridan Tatsuno.
Let me introduce Sheridan Tatsuno. Let's hear him out of what he has spoken during the same meeting of WTE Forum. He said about sustainable living planning that Sheridan has mastered gels well with what we see from Professor James' life outside the city. His experience is so important in mapping our world sustainable living, decarbonization of cities, and rejuvenation of rural areas with clean water, clean energy, high organically production, waste resource management, all that critically need to be developed with affordable limits. In this context, I see a great innovative mind in Sheridan on mapping and measuring.
Purposes, so we were using it for sustainable city planning. Our team had been working in VR for 20 years, since the early 90s, when they used $1 million machines, mainframes, and $100,000 headsets. They came from the world's leading environmental engineering company, Sweco. So as you know, Sweden is probably probably 30 or 40 years ahead of the United States in sustainability thinking and actual planning. So that's the background. So what we did is I took the experiences from our virtuality in Sweden, practical hands-on things, based on 20 years of experience using VR for sustainable cities. But what we only had was the visualization in 3D. So what we needed was the data, because you can't, unless you can measure, you can't prove anything. And I'm an urban planner, and I'm a data junkie. I love data. And one of the problems in all these world forums on climate is that they have great ambitions, goals, but they have no metrics, no KPIs or key performance indicators. and nor do they have data to prove anything. And so we're flying blind. So one of the thoughts we had in Virtual Gaia is to bring data which can be visualized to the globe. So if you go to Virtual Gaia, it's very much like Google Earth, except we don't rely on Google because Google, as you know, you can't do for making money, you can't do things. The customer service is non-existent.
Convert Brownfield to Greenfield. Marshall Mermel.
Next, I'd like to give a portion of what Marshall Mermel, the Chief Executive Management at Advanced Resilient Technology Limited, had to say on CO2 emission. He's a very forceful speaker with a lot of experience, and is an area where his contribution on a technical aspect of how it could be all done, particularly from in investment and the returns on climate bonds, and in a huge this thing over 500 million euros. I would like you to hear him.
Washing, which I think part of the politics is about greenwashing. So for carbon CO2 reduction and emissions to be addressed, we need to make sure that we're transparent, that everybody's working on a transparent platform, and that we're going out and making funding that is, from our perspective, is a infrastructure lift. It's not investment capital. It's not family office capital. It's not the X Prize. The X Prize by what's his name? The Tesla guy is $100 million, but you don't get 100 million. You get maybe 5 million. If you're lucky, you might get 20. We're going after a bond that's 500 million euros. That's a huge amount of money, but it's under a certain taxonomy, and there's different taxonomies. The one we're pursuing is the waste management taxonomy, which means we're taking waste or a brownfield entity as defined in Europe as opposed to the United States, and converting it into a 100% greenfield entity. You can't be partial. You can't do 95%. You can't do 99%. It has to be 100%, and you have to prove it. And you have to prove it through science, not because you say you do it. So we submitted all that documentation, got our letter of fit, and we're now pursuing the bond. When we get the bond and the money, what we will do is we have formed 7 joint ventures with brownfield operators. Those are landfill operators, waste haulers, or people that have so much waste they're just burning it or burying it in the ground. And by burying it in the ground is as bad as burning it, because when you bury it in the ground, guess what? You're causing toxicity to the aquifers, and all our potable water on Earth is not on the surface of the Earth. It's in aquifers because the Earth acts as a filtration media. And technology that can take salt water and convert it into potable water, that's possible too. So we're working with different types of technologies to bring that to place. We have 4 fundamental technologies that combine with other technologies and other providers who are interested to joint venture with us. We can solve the CO2 emission issue in a certain way. We're not 100%. We don't claim.
Is the government serious? What our scientific communities say?
I'd like to tell what other speakers have mentioned about, some of the salient points I'm giving in my write-up on white paper on accounting for climate change. Professor David Smith, he says CO2 is a leading indicator. Transportation about 35% greenhouse gases. Electricity production is the second, from coal and hydrocarbon production. The third is from industry. Then Mr. Hardik Shah, he made a very good point. He asked how we can educate people. Business with sustainable products would do well. The demand would drive particularly in this area. He has come out with the ESV, environmental saving value, with 5 criteria. Number 1, tree saving. Number 2, CO2 saving. Number 3, land pollution saving. Number 4, air pollution saving. And number 5, water pollution saving. It's a very interesting concept which he has talked about. It's very nice. Then my good friend James Reed is a very another forthright commentator. He said, why are we trying to live at all? He has seen things like rivers burning. He cannot tolerate this sort of a thing that is happening. He says people are trying to persuade not to inform. Don't vote for the guys holding a snowball, he says. Political system is blaming each other. Change what you can. How do we get the actual facts rather than the opinion? This requires a post-capitalist society, because the capitalist society that we live on is really good about fudging numbers or hiding numbers. So you don't look at the real data, need to make an informed choice. There is an expertise so many have become so good at in disguise what you really wanting to know. How to do in the natural way, deforestation to afforestation. Taking note of ocean, as Paul said, ecosystem along the coast, more efficient than the forest, natural ecosystem. We are not paying any attention to it. Soft marshes, part of the nature's way of coping, support this, he says. That was James Reed. Professor Paul Beckwith, another forthright speaker, and he says, we are trying to find a way to take out the CO2 from the atmosphere, which is just the opposite of what we are doing for centuries, emitting CO2 into the atmosphere. The tap is wide open. Those of the emissions. The drain is partially clogged. We won't know. The world won't know. The people won't know. The population won't know whether the government is serious or not addressing the climate change, as to fossil fuel subsidy would disappear to zero. Very pertinent. More on it in my write-up. Professor Donald Staney. How are we going to change? Places like North Dakota, the entire community is dependent on oil industry. Snowball Senator in Hove is voted in Oklahoma because he is going to protect that livelihood. Main problem on CO2 is transportation. Iceland is an interesting project, converting CO2 from atmosphere and pumping into the ground, turning into limestones beneath the earth, but very expensive. Central government has to mandate on zero emission. We can't subsidize fossil fuel anymore. He points out the danger of asking Saudi Arabia, UAE, Nigeria to go back to be poor again. Very right. And next is Dan Tredd. He's a very effective speaker. He says everyone must become a lobbyist. It's a question of lobbying the government, the parliamentarians, the senators, the Congress people. Do something for the CO2 emission. That's what he says. CO2 emission, fossil fuel emission, maybe it is the most harmful emission, he says. Wild habitat are lost. Number of mammals are cut. Food system is going to be huge. 1,500 miles the food travels, and we need food security webs, he suggests. Adam. Let me introduce Adam from the Youth Brigade. we need to focus on despite the enormous task of containing carbon emission that is engulfing our minds, the scientific community, as well as the society at large, that possibly the youth has to take up the mantle of reverse mentoring, that Adam, our young participant, brings the future to the present. He looks at Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, space travel, space colonization, reignite exploratory human spirits, new knowledge, new things, knowledge-based economy, talent economy, open-sourced, and post-capitalistic economy, to the age of collaboration, now or never. The right choices in the right direction. A clip from the discussion video of Adam.
Well, so I think they're looking into enforcing a speed limit for these electric scooters. I know I've been startled plenty of times when a scooter whizzes past me when I have my headphones on listening to music, but it's not unusual for new motions and endeavours to have some growing pains, of course. So yes, Nottingham has much to be proud of on that front, without sounding like too much of a plug. But yeah, and furthermore, I would like to second what Mr. Paul Beckwith said about the seas and oceans. So hopefully what individuals like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson, etc. are endeavouring to accomplish with space travel and colonization, trips to Mars and so forth, that this will reignite this exploratory spirit like we witnessed with the first space race of the 20th century in the 50s and 60s, and going back a bit before that with Jack Parsons and V2 rockets. So hopefully SpaceX and so on will help to remind us that we are also explorers, as well as artists, politicians, doctors, journalists, business people. We are also explorers, and we will want to explore more of our oceans and all the new worlds and living beings waiting for us way down below. So hopefully the more we discover, the more we can see just how big our responsibilities are, and hopefully the quicker we will step up to a responsible full spectrum stewardship of this planet. But of course we could argue, using the flip side to that, where we could say that this is a part of the problem, but that is exactly the problem, and the way we explore, probe, research and discover new knowledge, new worlds and new things contributes to kind of destruction we are addressing here. And also wanted to acknowledge what Mr. James Eade said about a post-capitalist society specifically. So the World Talent Economy Forum could be at the forefront of this, pioneering concepts and ideas like post-capitalism, especially knowledge-based economies and talent economies. And so for the sake of discussion and for our viewership, I'll just quickly recite the definition. So firstly, knowledge-based economy. The knowledge-based economy is an expression coined to describe trends in advanced economies towards greater dependence on knowledge, information, and high skill levels, and the increasing need for ready access to all of these by the business and public sectors. And secondly,
recommendation, cream ratings.
Is my recommendation. How you go about the CO2 emission, climate change, accounting for climate change, as I wish to persuade you to look at the opportunity of doing on a global scale. This is through my innovative IPR. It's a corporate management operating system, and it's called cream ratings, cream reports to be prepared by each and every company with a common factor for all. I'll explain. CREAM is an acronym for corporate governance, risk management, earnings, accounting quality, and management quality. Here, with regard to the CO2 emission, let me state the nitty-gritty of it, what are named as scopes. Please listen.
Scope 1 emissions are the direct emissions that your activities create, like the exhaust from the car you drive, or for a business, the trucks it drives to transport its products from one place to another, or the generators it might run. Scope 2 emissions are indirect emissions that come from the production of the electricity or heat you use, like the traditional energy sources that light up your home or power the buildings owned by a business. Scope 3 emissions are the indirect emissions that come from all the other activities in which you're engaged, including the emissions associated with producing the food you eat, or manufacturing the products that you buy. For a business, these emission sources can be extensive, and must be accounted for across its entire supply chain, the materials in its buildings, the business travel of its employees, and the full life cycle of its products, including the electricity customers may consume when using the product. Given this broad range, a company's Scope 3 emissions are often far larger than its Scope 1 and 2 emissions put together. Project SEED, Social, Environmental, Economic Development Goals, 17 SDGs brought under one umbrella.
Secondly, as Professor James Ehrlich made a mention about why only one CO2 emission. How are we going to look at all the 17 SDGs? This is my handiwork, which I had already published. I'd like to make a mention here, called Project SEED, Social, Environmental, Economic Development Goals, 17 SDGs brought under one umbrella. That's what Professor James said. That's what I would like to give you that information. And he said we are working hard, tirelessly, how we can address almost all the 17 SDGs under one umbrella. All 17 SDGs are brought under one umbrella, Project SEED. Giving below the 17 SDGs framework, 9 for social, 4 for environmental, and 4 for economic development goals.
Inactivity-based cost management, IBCM.
Let me introduce to my IPR, Inactivity-based cost management, IBCM. IBCM has 5 principles by which CO2 emission targets of 2030 and 2050 be met on a daily basis. Activity as a cost incidence, whereas inactivity a cost consequence. Measure cost consequence now. That's the theme. Cost consequence of the Industrial Revolution 1, 2, and 3 we are seeing with the CO2 emission affecting the climate globally. Measuring cost consequence is the job of each person entrusted with the scope 1, 2, and 3 targets. Let me briefly narrate the 5 principles. Principle number 1, what gets measured gets managed. Corporate governance goes by Newton's third law. If the rule is expressed, then conduct is measured. If diesel emission fiasco could not be managed because there was no rule in the first instance, whether a rule allows a cheat software to be created or not. So, we are not able to measure it and we are not able to manage it. Principle number 2, measure qualitative elements of management. Greenwashing or cheat software, be it for diesel emission or voting machine, is perpetrated by individuals. We have no regulatory authority excepting the accounting profession to take action against the individuals. Code of good conduct or code of business principles or adopting indigenous wisdom need creating a detailed policy statement record. Principle number 3, corporate atomic structure. You must have heard about the guys who went to a shoe salesman analogy. When the first salesman went and dropped, suddenly he found nobody is wearing the shoes. And he sent a note to the company. Nobody is going to buy my shoes. Nobody is accustomed to wear the shoes. But the second one also came, supposed to be from Beta. He said, oh, nobody is wearing the shoes. My consignment I have brought myself here is nothing. Please send as many consignment as possible ASAP, because everybody is going to wear the shoes. That's a challenge. In the entire universe, we are the only species who do not follow the laws of the universe. There is not a single company that follows the universal law of physics. So, my friends, I in a safe place, telling you I'm a better salesman. Every one of you is going to adopt corporate atomic structure. I give in table 1, table 6.1, explains the similarity between the atomic structure and corporate atomic structure. The board and the society form a nucleus, and the CEO team spins around it. The society does not influence the identity of a company, but adds mass to it. In other words, it brings in the needed stability to the corporate atomic structure when the CEO team, the electron of the organization, spins around the nucleus. In reality, in the atomic structure, the electron spins around the nucleus at 3/4 of the speed of light. It is the neutron coming into the nucleus that brings in the stability, lest the electron shoots off in the tangent. Same case with the corporate atomic structure. There is an important aspect of ethical responsibility. We will come to that. The board undertakes the ethical responsibility, and the CEO team the fiscal responsibility. The society is made up of the accounting and auditing professions, professors, scientific community, universities, who act as the trustee of the society within a corporate entity. The board failed to undertake ethical responsibility in case of diesel emission fiasco of Volkswagen. WTE Forum members take the responsibility of creating climate change policy, white paper or blueprint, as Sharif calls it, to persuade the boards of several companies to adopt the policy so that a common policy statement could pass through the United Nations. Principle number 4, return on intangible. CREAM is an acronym for corporate governance, risk management, earnings, accounting quality, and management quality. Climate change KPIs be brought in the CREAM ratings framework and measured. Return on intangible is equal to action or inaction divided by intangible. The numerator is action or inaction, 1 or 0. The denominator is intangible. It is the power source, which is available only with the humankind, which is common for everyone, which is applied to act on a matter to liberate it from one space to the other. Intangible is a common factor for all persons and hence always valued at 1. Action 1, inaction 0, a binary value of return on intangible. Law number 1, energy is liberated matter. We show on the P&L and balance sheet. Law 2, matter is energy waiting to happen. That is, we are yet to push the matter to the law number 1. We prepare an index of inactivity to the extent of no action is being taken. CREAM ratings framework deals with 170 open-ended process blocks. Table 7.1 and 7.2 represent the matrix and 170 process blocks. 12 are quantitative, as represented by earnings, 158 qualitative elements represented by corporate governance, risk management, accounting quality, and management quality. For example, Microsoft has detailed CO2 emissions targets for 2030 and 2050. This would appear under M, management quality. Law number 3. When antimatter collides with matter, it forms a pure energy. That's the effort put in by each individual. For a single task, there are 5 members forming a team. 1 from ethical responsibility and 4 from fiscal responsibility. To illustrate, when cheap software being implanted into vehicles, 11 million of them, had there been a member assigned to the task from ethical responsibility group, then the task will not move forward without the consent of the lone member of the team. So the binary value of return on intangible equation tracks performance by each task. If there are 50,000 tasks, say under scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, for completion by 2030 and 2050, then there would be 10,000 teams that would be working toward the goals set. CAGR and CARR, reduction rate, would be targeted goals, bring them to CDGR and CDRR. D is a daily tracking of all the tasks. With regard to climate change, tasks entrusted to these 10,000 teams, as an example, the company's dashboard would reflect the zero inactivity by law number 2. Bring the abstraction to reality, acknowledge a value where value is due, and deconstruct what is valueless. CARR is what climate change would be filled up with. Return on intangible is a new form of capitalism, ethically, morally, and fairly implemented. Return on intangible enables the accomplishment of an infinite succession of finite purposes by controlling each goal. There is no separate company rating. Consolidating the individual score for, say, those 10,000 teams would be the company rating for, say, this division, climate change. Unlike our flat organization that we have corporate atomic structure, measures the energy input by each person, establishing accountability for each task. The team members are yoked together but work independently. Ex post facto variance analysis is eliminated with the index of inactivity created on the go. For 10,000 teams, each team brings the optimized performance, zeroing law number 2. Healthy competition among the teams to reach the targets set. The goal congruence is made possible by the same goal for everyone, which is optimized level of performance. It is supported by metrics and benchmarks that are aligned to nature and hence remain intangible forever. Accounting for dreams referred above has the details which you may please refer to. Blueprint for National Climate Change Initiatives. WTE Forum initiatives on better blueprint for climate change would find useful in extrapolating what we discussed about on Microsoft. I give below by table 1 gross state domestic product for the state of Gujarat in India, a blueprint taking the level of state GDP from the current level to reach 1.5 trillion by 2024. The same blueprint would be appropriate for climate change targets set on a national level for 17 SDGs under a single umbrella as Professor James had called for. Please see Measuring the Intangible, Project C, Social, Environmental, Economic Development, a CREAM ratings presentation. Here, you will see how it is being taken into account. Let me explain. EPP, effort per person, add-on for Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. The 17 SDGs are targeted and tracked as to the individual performance by EPP, effort per person. CAGR and CAR are brought to CDGR and CDRR. In the state of Gujarat, the workforce is about 15 million. The EPP for each of the 17 SDGs, 9 social, 4 environmental, and 4 economic development goals are analyzed by Project SEED, social, environmental, and economic development goals as to the individual status by the dashboard. CO2 Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 targets 2030 and 2050 would be integrated to the EPP GSDB targets by individual performance. I'm giving the charts and how agriculture and forestry and fishing, how it is being developed in terms of GDP progress. Now you add every one of it, Scope 1, 2, and 3, in every one of these categories. Number 2, mining and quarrying, manufacturing, electricity, gas, water supply, and other utility services, trade, repair services in hotels and restaurants, transport, storage, communication, and services related to broadcasting, financial services, real estate ownership of dwelling and professional services, public administration, other services. So you have all these categories are being taken note of. You apply the CO2 process blocks under Scope 1, 2, and 3 and bring in EPP. So when you have a 15 million workforce in, say, in a state of Gujarat, you are accounting for the accountability of CO2 emission in each and every unit or a company attached to it. Let me come to the last principle, principle number 5, emergent property phenomenon. The 3 principles of emergent property according to Nobel laureate Murray Gell-Mann are as follows. 1. Conformability of nature to herself. 2. Applicability of simplicity. And 3. Unreasonable effectiveness. By emergent property, he means you don't add something more to get something more. Rather, shed your inhibitions, CARR, and focus on using your ethical assets. 1. Conformability of nature to herself. For nature is very consonant and conformable to herself, says Isaac Newton. With corporate atomic structure, the first principle, conformability of nature to herself, is met. Number 2, applicability of simplicity. It is ensured by limiting the entire management process to only 2, the creative process and the action process. The second principle of emergent property, the applicability of the criterion of simplicity, is met. There are 6 stages of development, only 2 processes, the creative process and the action process. It is simple enough for school children to learn governance by way of a game such as hopscotch. Number 3, unreasonable effectiveness. In return on intangible, covering the entire gamut of management with a single formula, the unreasonable effectiveness principle is met. Unreasonable effectiveness is the art of resolving a paradox with the least number of mathematical calculations. The simplest one is the opposite value analysis, which can resolve any such mental aberrations. It is a truth serum.
MSMEs, under one umbrella 17 SDGs, CO2 scopes compliant, A, GDP GNH combo.
Work in process, MSMEs. Currently, I'm advising Opulence Group Ahmedabad, India, in establishing a platform for MSMEs, 63 million of them, and startups, a million of them possibly. Step-by-step progress for investment banking, IB, and knowledge banking, KB. CREAM report is for fiscal and ethical responsibility of a company that MSMEs will be provided with the knowledge banking of their management operating systems to keep track of their plans and actions. In addition, and in particular, CREAM report will cover Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 parameters. MSMEs shall be transformed into a unit of 1. Fit as a fiddle. 2. Knowledgeable. 3. Justifying their conduct. 4. Compete in international market with corporate governance ratings, inclusive of CO2 compliant certified company. And 5. JNH Index integrated certification on the following 5 issue areas. 1. Health. 2. Education. 3. Work. 4. Personal happiness. And 5. Cities. As per the Global Council for Happiness and Well-being, GCHW parameters. This platform would ultimately cover around 630 million workforce, assuming average 10 per MSME, facilitating their contribution as well as ensuring government initiatives in this respect. The database of this group is going to be phenomenal and going to be very useful in our discussion on CO2 emission, where we are disputing the impact from urban to peri-urban and ultimately to all the villages. It's going to be a very important database on CO2 emission. Concluding remarks. We identify by area that knocks small countries out to de-industrialize and go for outsourcing. A scopes compliant MSME do contribute to the reduction of global warming. They have to get ready anyway. Instead of a survey of minuscule people and publishing a World Happiness Index, now one can create a knowledge database as to the 5 criteria met by organized units that are measured by this Opulence platform. CO2 emission reduction is doable with CREAM ratings report.